Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be setting up my bullet journal for the month of July, but first let's do a little flip through of my June setup. I was really happy with the sections and the layouts for last month, and I used my bullet journal quite a lot, as you can see, so I will be keeping the layout mostly the same for this month as well. And I also had a lot of fun with the doodles last month because they were really simple and quick to do. So I went for a really simple style again for this month with just maybe a little bit more drawing. As for the theme for this month, I went for oranges and I wanted to pick out some colors with a lot of contrast. So I first picked out this bright orangey yellow and then also a muted dusty rose and then a light minty green and a very dark bluish green. And as always, all the products are going to be listed in the description as well. Now the first page, as always, is going to be dedicated to a little calendar, and I'm first writing the weekdays on the top with the dark green shade. For the sizing, each day is 2 spaces wide, and then the dates take up 1 space vertically, and I'm leaving another space empty in between each week. I wrote the dates in black with my Pilot Juice pen because it's just nice and thin and it doesn't stand out too much. Then I'm also crossing out the empty days at the bottom with the bright orange. As always, I'm adding some lines in between the weeks with both of the green shades, and I just corrected any mistakes with a white acrylograph. Moving on to the cover page, I wanted to draw a very simple branch with oranges into the middle of the page, and I just started off with the stem in the dark green shade, and I just made it a bit thicker so that it stands out a bit better. Then I'm adding some leaves in both of the green shades, and I'm alternating between them and trying to make sure that the same color is never directly next to each other for a bit more variation. I'm also adding some small oranges here and there. I didn't add too many because I wanted the green shades to be the main colors, and so the orange and the rosy shade are just going to be for little accents. I also added a few more stems on the sides to make the shape a bit more interesting. This time I did struggle quite a bit with colors again because I had some very specific shades in mind, but I ended up finding some combinations I was really happy with in the end. Since the green shades are almost blue, it creates a really nice complementary contrast to the orange, and the sort of forest green adds a lot of contrast because it's super dark and it almost looks black. In general, I really love going for a nice mix of light and dark, muted and bright, and also just some different shades of colors. I added some small details to the leaves, so with the light color on the dark leaves and the other way around, and I also went over the oranges to create a bit of shading with the same marker, and I also added some small dots to kind of indicate the texture of oranges. Next, I'm writing the title underneath with the dusty rose shade in just a very simple script. Lastly, I added some small dots here and there to just fill the space a bit more evenly and add a bit more visual interest to the cover page. And that's it for these 2 pages, so let's move on to my habit trackers. I started off by writing the title on the top into the middle of the page with the same dusty rose shade to keep things consistent. I just wrote daily habits into 2 rows, much like for the last setup, because I just really like the look of it. And I also added 2 simple lines on the sides with the minty green shade to fill out the space a bit more. I used that same shade for the borders of my daily habit trackers, and as for the spacing, these boxes are 7 spaces wide and 6 spaces tall, and I also added another line under the first row where I wanted to write the weekdays. Then I'm writing the habits above the boxes with the dark green. This month I'm tracking not using social media in the morning, doing some kind of movement, whether that be a workout or just going for a little walk, doing some art practice, and not using my phone at night before sleeping. And I also wrote the weekdays into that first row of each box with the same shade. To track my habits, I will draw a circle when I complete it or cross out the day if I don't, which you can see in my flip through at the beginning of the video. I also crossed out the days from August again with the orange fine liner. Since there was some space on the sides, I wanted to fill it with more doodles, and I decided to just draw the oranges and the leaves on their own for a bit more variation. So I first placed down the oranges, and then I filled the other spaces with the leaves, and I alternated between the light and dark green again, just like before, and I just kind of made it into a little pattern. I added some small leaves to the oranges, and I also made sure that the leaves are facing into different directions to make them look a bit more varied, and then I added the smaller details to the oranges and leaves just like before. Lastly, I also added the small dots again, and then I moved on to my weekly habits. I went for the same style of title again, and I left 2 spaces empty above it for just a bit more white space so that the page doesn't look too crowded and chaotic. Underneath, I'm writing the weekly habits with the dark green shade, and I'm using the same ones as always, so making my weekly spreads, having a self-care day, doing a weekly reset, and working out 1 to 2 times per week. To track them, I'm also making 5 circles on the right side with the orange shade, and I went over them later to make them stand out a bit more. And then to track the habits, I will color in a circle if I complete it, or cross it out if I don't. I added some dots in front of the titles with the light green, and also some lines next to the titles to add a bit more color. Lastly, like I mentioned, I went over the circles again just to make them a bit thicker and darker. The next page is, as always, going to be dedicated to some general planning sections, so I'm first making the title in the same style as before, and I just wrote down July planning, and I also added the light green on the sides again to keep everything consistent. Then I'm making 6 sections in total, and the first ones are for each week of July, and the 2 smaller ones are for events in July and August. I made the borders with the light green again, and the weekly sections are 9 spaces wide and 8 spaces tall, and then the 2 smaller ones are only 4 spaces tall. I also left more space in the middle because I wanted to add some doodles later on, so there are 4 spaces empty in between the sections horizontally. I also left 4 spaces empty vertically between the sections for the title and some extra empty space, although I would have probably preferred just 3 spaces because it ended up being a bit too much. Then I wrote the titles for the sections with the dark green, and first I wrote week 1 through 4 for the weekly sections, and then I wrote July and August for the bottom 2 sections, and I left 1 space empty underneath the titles again. Next, I wanted to fill the middle part with some smaller orange branches, and they're sort of mirroring each other, but it really doesn't have to be perfect, and I just made sure to alternate where the oranges are placed. Then I'm adding the small leaves again with both of the green shades, and again I'm making sure to switch between the colors so that it looks a bit more varied. I probably should have made them a bit more narrow because they ended up being quite close to the sections sometimes, but I still think it turned out really cute in the end because just the sections can look a little bit bland otherwise. I'm adding the smaller details again to the leaves and the oranges, and then also the small dots to fill out the empty spaces in between the branches. If you don't have a lot of time, you could also simplify the doodles even more and just leave out the smaller details, and also just use markers instead of the acrylographs, since it can take a bit more time to color in the leaves evenly. I decided to add just a bit more color to the sections, so I first made some circles in the weekly sections for each task, and I also added some lines in between the sections with the light green shade, because again there was just a bit too much space for my liking. Lastly, I also used the dark green to make some lines next to the titles to fill out the space more evenly. And that is it for these spreads, so let's move on to my first weekly spread of July. This time I went for one of my favorite layouts where I split the page into 12 equal sections, and then I'm using the first one for a mini calendar, 7 of them for the weekdays, 1 for tasks or events happening next week, and then the rest for doodles, as you will see later on. For the mini calendar, I first wrote week 1 with the dusty rose shade on the top, and then I added the calendar underneath. I also made a border with the dark green all around to make it look a bit more clean. Next, I'm writing the weekdays with the dark green, and I'm centering them above each daily section, and each section is 11 spaces wide and 11 spaces tall. Then I'm making the boxes for each day with the light green, and again I'm leaving 1 space empty underneath the titles, so the boxes are only 9 spaces tall. And then I'm also leaving 1 space empty in between the sections vertically and 2 spaces horizontally, but as always it might be a bit different for your journal depending on how many grid spaces it has. So for reference, mine has 38 spaces vertically and 26 spaces horizontally. Next, I added some lines next to the titles again with the dark green, but of course you can also leave it out if you want. And then for the dates, I wanted to include a bit more color, so I made a circle with the orange as a background on the bottom of each section, and then I wrote the dates with the dark green on top. For the 2 sections underneath the mini calendar, I wanted to fill them completely with a larger branch because it just adds a lot more color to the spread, and it also breaks up the much more structured sections. I sketched out the shape beforehand so that I know where to place the oranges and leaves, and then I went through the same process as before, so starting with the main stem with the dark green, and then adding the oranges and leaves as well as some smaller stems here and there to fill the space evenly. I actually really like how the shape doesn't fill the rectangle out completely, and I think it just turned out super pretty, but since I don't really have a lot of commentary to add here, I wanted to give you guys just a few tips on using the acrylographs, because I know I definitely struggle with them sometimes, and it can just make it a bit frustrating to work with them. Of course, if you don't have them, you can just kind of ignore this part, and I hope you just enjoy the time lapse in the meantime. So this could probably apply to any sort of acrylic pens you might have, and I think the most important thing is that you do have to activate the pens every time you want to use them, which means you need to shake them a little bit so that the ink starts to flow again, and for the acrylographs, it is specified that you should shake them vertically. Now, if this doesn't quite work because maybe you haven't used them in some time, you can also press down on the tip just a few times to pump the ink into the tip of the pen, and then they should work just fine. Another thing to remember when you're done using them is that you should wipe off any of the excess paint on just a piece of paper and then close the cap so that they don't dry out. If your pen has dried up a bit, you can also take out the nib and put it in some soapy water to clean it, and then it should be as good as new. With the acrylographs from Arch and Olive, you do also get 2 replacement tips with the sets that you can buy, so you can use them in the meantime, which is actually what I did because mine were a bit dried up and I had not taken care of them properly before. So anyway, I hope this helps if you are using any sort of acrylic pens or if you're planning to get some in the future. For the last 2 sections, like I mentioned before, I wanted to add one for the next week, so that's what I'm doing here, and I just wrote next week on the top with the dark green, and then I added the section with the light green underneath, just like before. Lastly, I filled this section next to it with another branch doodle, and I just made it facing in the other direction than the bigger one, so that they don't look too similar, but if you wanted to include any other section, you could also make another one here. I really love how flexible this layout is because you could really place the sections in any spot and add as many additional sections as you want. Anyway, I went through the same process for the smaller branch, and I also love how it kind of gives the whole spread a sort of border on the sides. These doodles might look a little bit more complex than some of my other ones, but they really are very simple to make if you just take your time and make sure to give each element enough space. Lastly, I added these smaller details just like before, and that's all for the setup, so let's do a little flip through. I'm really happy that I kept trying to find the perfect color palette for this setup because I really love how it turned out in the end. I think this time the weekly spread is my favorite page out of this setup, but definitely let me know what you thought of this theme and which page was your favorite down in the comments. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment as well, and make sure to subscribe to my channel to see more of my content in the future. I also post my other weekly spreads in the community tab of my channel, so if you're ever looking for inspiration, you can find them there. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Bye!